The snap. Ruby jerked her head up just in time to see a rabbit fall into a trap she had set around the cave. Sweet! She silently cheered with a subdued fist bump and began to face her way towards the downed animal. While her companion usually hunted, that didn't mean she didn't know how to. It was just more of a routine that they settled upon. He hunted, she gathered. He got first pick at food, she got bath time first. Surprisingly mundane little details made this whole thing work. Crouching low and reaching for the animal, Ruby paused as her sharp gaze spied another one in the bush. It had paused too, petrified as it looked at the huntress. Yet it did not flex with its muscled hind legs that twitched as feverishly as its nose, which was overcome with the scent of fear. Instead, it continued to stare at her with eyes so wide and accusing that she could see the white sclera glaring at her from across the brush. It wasn't leaving without the other. Oh, were they mates? Ruby couldn't help the small squeal that escaped her lips at the adorable and romantic sight. Without hesitation, she released the trapped rabbit and watched as it skittered away as fast as it could to join the other. He probably mocked me for being so nice, she muttered refuelingly. This was the only negative which came to mind as she watched the two rabbits hop away in tandem, but it was the pervasive thought. To escape it, her mind drifted off back to what he had told her earlier. I understand it better than you. Certain things began to make sense for the silver-eyed girl: the lack of reaction from the public, the seemingly slow pace from the police. There was an answer there, but she was reluctant to admit it too. All those things that he had said about the people she had rescued, had they really done those such terrible things? Did it matter? With that thought, her mind drifted back to that day in the city with the supposed terrorist that he had tried to save her. Even if what he said was true, it didn't mean the man she had saved hadn't at least showed regret for his actions. Or maybe it was all a ploy. Maybe the sudden had been, "No," she huffed, "regardless of what they've done, everyone deserves a chance to repent," she firmly stated to no one. Besides, an individual's guilt didn't mean that the blonde himself had the right to choose whether someone lived or died, him or the people he worked for. Sighing contentedly to herself in the thought that she had come to the right decision, Ruby began to rest. To reset the trap while she did so, she accidentally looked around the camp only to see the two bunnies again. Oh, they were so cute. She continued to watch them as they pranced obviously to her machinations. With a self-content smile, she saw them play with one another when the bunny sneaked behind the other and proceeded to, "Oh, guys, don't do that here!" Ruby winced as she tried simultaneously to look away from the act of nature and drew the rabbit to somewhere more, "Just not there." Icky. He woke up without really being just yet the body moving on an unconscious command that he'd said a few hours before. It wasn't even light yet. In fact, he'd barely shut his eyes after the fire died and the broken moon rose fully, which was fine. He had been trained to live without sleep, even if he'd been doing so for weeks previous. What he couldn't live with was this: neither the feeling of helplessness nor the person adjacent to the fire who did this to him. A weapon was not needed to complete this task, even though he knew exactly where she hid them. There was plenty of rocks within the cave they had found themselves, but in the end he decided to use his bare hands. Perhaps this was another sign of the poor decision making that she caused. Naruto wanted to be rid of her. No, he had to be rid of her. She was compromising him, and it was not a pleasure to take her life, but a necessity. So why did he relish the heat bleeding from her neck? He woke up to his hands steepled around her throat, thumbs poised to collapse her windpipe. All the while she continued to snore obliviously. What was wrong with him? Do it or don't. Instead, he just knelt there in the darkness with his crescent moon eyes illuminating her pale, peaceful face. The fire had died and it took with it the last of the heat, but still he was sweating, trying to get himself to move. He thought that at any second that slumbering girl would wake and he would find himself another one of his nightmares. He had to keep reminding himself that even if she were to open her eyes, she couldn't see him. Darkness was his friend. There was no light pollution from the city, as far away as they were, and the glow from her scroll had died mere minutes before. It was pure luck that she hadn't been able to make a distress call. As much as he wanted to eliminate her, he wasn't sure he could face her. Not now, but the day would come as sure as the morning. The only way to ensure that she wouldn't intervene was to make sure she never saw the light of day. Yet for him, the shallow grotto where they slept might as well have been electrified. Though his thoughts and the paths ahead had never been so murky, where was the order he longed to hear? It never came, and as the night crawled by in that cave, eventually he crawled back to his side of the fire and laid back down, feeling like he had just done a marathon on his hands and feet. She wasn't his enemy, not today. It was finally quiet. Alone in the flashback. Alone like this, he could almost pretend that everything was back to normal. Hunting was hunting, and it didn't matter so much if his prey was human, faunus, or animal. Sometimes it seemed the animals were the smarter ones. The ones in the mountains were, at least, not having been contaminated by the encroachment of modern life. They still knew when they were in the presence of a predator, and the slightest misstep, the teeniest twitch would set them off. This was their home, and they knew it far better than he did, therefore there was little chance he would be able to find them if they ran. Plus, he had to get in close because of his substandard armament. A simple stick sharpened into a spear wasn't ideal, but it added to the challenge and made this little moment of reprieve last longer than it would otherwise. Though he was hungry, he wouldn't say that he was looking forward to the kill, because it meant that he would have to return to her. The mere thought of spending another second suffering in her inane chatter. Snap! Was it him? No. There, between the two poplars movement. From a crouch he went to all fours, a surprisingly natural transition. Gone were the social pretenses and even the drill of being an assassin. Here he could let himself be free, tail swishing openly, unbound by the trappings of humanity, though he would have to be careful to not let it give him away. Orange fur flittered lower to the ground. Breathing deep, he drank in the scent and the peaceful image. The tawny hide traps through the trees almost perfectly, camouflaged except for the afternoon light which betrayed its sheen. Hard hooves made surprisingly gentle footsteps, the only noise as he held his breath. It was coming towards him. One shot would be all it would take, and all he would get. He couldn't just wound it, no, because he was not serving justice in this endeavor. He was serving himself and his reluctant companion. Failure meant he did not deserve to live. These were the rules of nature. There was no cruelty in a clean kill. Life always ended in death, after all, which in turn beget a new life. There was no difference between the mature buck in his sights and the young girl back at the cave. One unhesitating thrust and big doe-like eyes opened wide and caught a flash of light. He was caught in their reflection, staring back at himself as he pounced on the unsuspecting creature. His image was unrecognizable. A beastly snarl bearing fangs and his whiskers folded into a vulpine visage that spoke of untold rage. The light faded from the deer's eyes along with the illusion, the sun following soon After wrenching free his shiv, he was hit in the face by a spurt of blood powered by the creature's last heartbeat. Naruto looked down at his kill, momentarily unsure of what he had just done, not sure of where, who, or even what he was, nor did he understand the warm, red thing which was cooling at his feet. He knew it had been alive once, and now, thanks to him, was he supposed to feel something? What had it done to deserve this premature end? Nothing. It had simply crossed his path. Simple as that. It was that easy. His heart clenched and his hand along with it, snapping the spear. But Naruto had gone deaf in that moment too, blood clogging his ears like it dyed his vision. So it seemed that he was looking at the world through rose-colored glasses. It was just that easy. Clarity. Time passed, not enough to change their situation, but sufficient for Naruto to return with a bountiful catch and a roaring fire to be placed between them, and for the girl to forget their inhibition. Do you think this fire will attract attention? Unknown. What about following the river? Unknown. What's your name? Unknown. You don't know your own name? Ruby couldn't help herself as she giggled at her success, tripping the boy up. I'm afraid don't understand the humor. Of course you don't. Ruby sighed as her mirth died out, returning the somber mood. What made you decide to become one? The scythe wielder asked, over the crackling fire and the smell of charred flesh, which didn't smell as appetizing as it once had. "Want what?" Naruto questioned unaffectedly as he took another bite out of the deer meat and treated it with his razor-sharp canines. "An assassin." Almost whispering the word, Naruto slowed his frenzied chewing so he could hear its echo on the mountains far behind him. "I was born into it," Naruto responded easily enough after chewing and swallowing, casting a sidelong glance across the fire to see that Ruby had hardly touched her haunch. "So you didn't actually have a choice?" The girl was much more interested in the fire, hands dangling so near it that she was liable to get burned. "No." Pausing, Naruto contemplated chewing the question instead of the food. "I suppose I didn't." Silence returned. It was uncomfortable, and it had only become more so the longer they spent out in the wilderness. Wildlife had fled at their presence, forcing Naruto to go out further and further each day for the meals and casting the territory they had claimed into a formidable silence. It was a hollowed, quiet, presided over only by the redoubled mountains, continuing to hold them captive, and the resistance only by the sputtering flame of fire which refused to die. Then Naruto broke it. Why choose to be a huntsman? Was it the silence he feared? Why did he ask that question? He would understand a moment later. That was a mistake. Oh my gosh, why wouldn't you want to be a huntsman? The young girl gushed, a switch being flipped inside of her which somehow managed to brighten the whole clearing and empower the muted sounds. Taking down bad guys and protecting the innocent is like the dream job. Not to mention the super cool weapons we get to wield. It's especially fun when you technically you know. It just became quiet again as the conversation embedded and the fire waned. Naruto had gently stopped eating to give the girl a perplexed stare, which, in Ruby's opinion, might have been the most emotion he had ever shown, and all he had done was raise an eyebrow. Maybe it was all a trick of the firelight. So yeah, she finished lamely, even the words before feeling like nothing but echoes of the invisible mountains compared to what she'd heard earlier that afternoon. I've always wanted to be a huntress. Silence returned, not to be broken by anything except Ruby, who just couldn't keep her mouth shut. "What is your name?" she questioned as she realized she didn't actually know it. "Kitsune." Then again, perhaps there was a reason. Perhaps there was a reason she hadn't bothered in the first place. Besides, was it really a good idea to be on first name basis with the enemy, even though if it had been forced, since she thought of him as such. Did he still think that way about her? Heck, he could have lied and given her a false name. No, no, he couldn't. Just like she couldn't give up hope. You're not going to tell me, are you? She then, though she tried a nibble of her food anyway, in case she somehow offended her provider. Your own name, I mean. No, but it sounded like she had already said or done something wrong with the way he glared at her from across the campfire. If you need to call me something, you may use that. I suspect your headmaster has already given you that much. In her eyes it was so little. Names were how most this conversation started, so it was here, she supposed, for the boy who had been an assassin since birth. Why should his given name be any different than the one he was assigned? That mask was real enough. It haunted her dream often enough. Sure enough, she realized that even this little tidbit of info was a form of trust, one she would be remiss to ignore. Well, what about the code name of your teammates? Once again, Ruby tested her luck, undeterred by the cold shoulder that she'd long since gotten used to. Can you tell me them, at least, so I have something to call them? I cannot, Naruto responded, restraining his urge to lash out at her again by stuffing his face. He had also gotten used to her somewhat, and though he might have been willing to suffer physical whims, he would be damned before he revealed any information that could harm his teammates. Not that it matters in the long run anyway, he muttered with gristle being chewed in the corner of his mouth. What do you mean? Wary once again of an answer that she would be able to stomach less than the gamey fare. Nevertheless, Ruby felt compelled to ask. We are assassins. Labeling himself and the others, it wasn't so different than the way he flayed the deer's flesh and set it out on spits of cook. We live and die in silence and in darkness. Our destiny brings no glory nor fame, only duty. As such, as much as she dislikes this boy, there was something about the callous way he dismissed himself and his comrades that bothered her more. Maybe it wasn't so much him, but his misguided point of view that she detested. Maybe she could help with that. I don't think that's true, she offered, ever optimistic. You don't know anything about our way of life. Returning to his food and on the friendly behavior again, Naruto tore off a chunk and chewed with a certain viciousness. Fair enough, Ruby consented, unperturbed, but I hope that outside your missions you can use your teammates' real names. Why? Stopping with a heavy gulp, he let the question fill his mouth instead. Another echo from his team found itself in his unlikely spot. Because it shows that you trust and care for them, Ruby responded patiently as if she were explaining to a child why they had to ask nicely if they wanted ice cream. Care? Like you like them. Stuttering, she tried to expand the topic she found so simple. Like them? The blonde tilted his head in curiosity and narrowed his eyes through the fire, an action which painted his animalistic visage in a very different light. His complete and genuine ignorance looked, dare she say it, cute. I am not the best at it. Ignoring that thought for the time being, Ruby sighed, lamenting ever becoming a parent. My sister is better at this kind of thing. Okay, so you see how we're in this situation, with her arms encompassing everything with the fire's glow. The blonde nodded in confirmation. Both our teams are out there looking for us. How would you feel if one of them went missing? Resisting the textbook answer, Naruto thought on it a moment. He rationalized that if one of his teammates had gone missing or had been hurt, like he had been, he would be at an extreme disadvantage. There were not many in the organization who liked, no tolerated working with him. for something to happen to the few that did, even if they could at times be as irritating as this huntress. It would be inconvenient, to say the least, but there was more to it than that. He found it was not a simple question as their enumerated rules made it out to be. The death of a teammate was not a quantifiable loss, and the more he found himself thinking about it, the more he found it troubling. I see, Naruto spoke at last remembering why he tolerated these strange talks. I shall take your words into consideration. Ruby looked at him in surprise before she felt her lips twitching. Was she smiling? So, burying these conditions, she continued almost naturally. Do you read comic books? Comic books? He said slash asked again in the way which was becoming almost second nature. Having gone through this banal song and dance so many times, when the stars lit up in her eyes, he knew to brace himself for what came next. A right turn in the conversation, a heady uplift of the mood, a detailed exposition on the minutiae of these so-called graphic novels, which were apparently endemic in the illustration of young adults into the huntsman lifestyle, a lifestyle which he was also learning about at the loaded end of Ruby's non-stop talking. The whole experience was all becoming less foreign to him, the pieces of his shattered life falling into place naturally around his this thorn in his side. Normally, I had somehow expanded to include her, and while neither realized it at the time, their lives had expanded to include one another. This was the end of their individual stories and the start of their most lived ones, though this would come later. End of chapter 11.